Well, thank you. Hey, those of you who have read Hardwiring Excellence and talked about that, thank you very much. You know, periodically, it's interesting. We actually have 9 full-time people now work in education. We have hired, in fact, the person who runs it is called Dr. Janet Pilcher, who got her doctorate degree from Florida State University in evaluation of educational systems. So we're pretty excited. We haven't worked it in a university setting, but we have done really well in Oklahoma City, Charleston, big public healthcare education systems. In fact, the Carnegie Foundation has asked us to present on this. You know, our sort of belief is you don't lead with sizzle, you lead with substance, and you show results. So for example, Studer Group went from really 2 employees and 3 employees in 1988, 1999 to over 200 employees right now, all full-time, and we've done it without ever advertising. We've done it without ever creating a brochure. Kyle's already done more advertising in his short weeks here. I said, when Kyle came here, I got a cute story for you, and I said, Kyle, now remember, don't make your, you know, go low key, don't make a big deal about you being there, just go in and start doing the deal. He said, well, they're gonna take some pictures of me when I'm there. I said, that's okay. So then I get on an airplane, and I open up the magazine, and there's Kyle Marrero. So I called him up and I said, let's talk about what low-key really means here. Let's talk about what low-key really means. So anyway, thank you. So let me tell you about the 2 books you got, and they're complimentary of us, so let me tell you what they're for. As we've been going along, I write most of my books on leadership, and they work. And do we work in education? You bet we work. We're at 16 medical schools right now. We work with 16 academically oriented medical schools, which I think sort of count as, you know, secondary education a little bit, you know, so we do that. You know, some of the ones you're most familiar with, of course, are University of Oklahoma, Alabama, Birmingham, Vanderbilt, Froedtert, some of those. So we work, in fact, so we do that. Big challenge there all the time is actually the department chairs, because the department chairs normally have been made department chairs because they're really great physicians or researchers, and now they're in charge of people, and they'd rather be researchers. I mean, it's a little, not that it's good or bad, it's just now they got this whole new job. I remember working with the Cleveland Clinic, and the first time we were working with a place like that, and I didn't want to embarrass the department chairs about training and leadership. So we talked about the leadership training and skill building that was needed there, and I never mentioned them. And one of them said, well, we get to go, don't we? He said, don't think I know how to do any of this stuff you've been talking about. So we do have some experience in that arena. So I've written a lot on leadership, but I also talk to employee groups. And over the years, employee groups have come up to me and asked a lot of questions. So what we did with this great employee handbook is we tried to put together what are the things that really get to an employee. It's not our human resource handbook that covers benefits and covers hours and covers vacation and covers paid time off. It's really, what do you do when you hear something you wish you didn't hear, but you think you should tell somebody maybe? What do you do with that stuff? What do you do with the coworker who's been there longer than you, you're sort of new, but they're wearing you out with their negativity? You know, what do you do with somebody that you're not sure it's doing it correctly, but you don't want to have retribution? How do you handle that? What do you do with gossip when you hear gossip? What do you do when you feel you and your boss have a communication issue? So that book is written for the employee. Now let me explain. We still get feedback. In fact, for the first time, I got one a little bit today. They're real mad because this fellow says, Quint said you should only try to be at the 90%. We should be at the 100%. But I had over 100 employees read this book and around the country. And what they had to judge it on is they had to judge each chapter and they had to give it 3 scores. Yeah, this has to be in the book. Without a doubt, this must be in the book. The second one is, if you got time for it, it wouldn't hurt. And the third one was, do not put this in the book because it's condescending and people are going to feel you're talking down to them. So there isn't any smile, there isn't any handshake. Are those things important? Yeah, but I don't do it. So there's 3 sections in there. One for the employee on how to deal with coworkers, one how to deal with bosses, and one how to deal with customers. Now, I will say organizations that have done this, gotten it for their employees, they actually create book clubs, or the supervisor goes over it with them in a long process, have found a lot of issues go away. Because employees don't have consistent ways to handle things any better than anywhere else. So they even sometimes have inconsistent bosses throughout their life, so they're inconsistent. So I talk a lot about that. It reminds me, and this wasn't I was going to talk about today, but in my book, Straight A Leadership, I have a chapter that I'll call Park Ranger Leadership. And the good news about everyone in this room is you were promoted at one time. Now, and if you didn't want the job, we even have a way to talk people into taking jobs they don't want. You know that, don't you? We call them interims. Yeah. I don't know if I want to do this. Be the interim for a while, won't you? How long does interim last? That could last as long as you're sucker enough to do it, interim. Anyway, right? Everybody's looking at you. Okay. But one of the reasons that you distinguished yourself from peers is because you brought solutions. And the difference, what I see many times, is people that move into leadership roles were always good solution people. Probably in junior high, high school, education, probably in your family. They're probably calling you saying, who should have Thanksgiving this year? Where should it be at? What should people bring? So you got promoted because you're a solution person. Now, the beauty for your boss and why your boss gave your name for a promotion or wanted you promoted, because you were one of their favorite employees, because you brought them solutions. Anybody can bring problems. I mean, think about it. If somebody came into your department and they had sort of experience with what you had, how long would it take them to identify the problems in your department? 10 seconds. A week? 2 weeks? At best. So we don't pay for problems, we pay for solutions. Now, with that, though, here's the flip side. Every positive thing has a side effect. It truly does. When I went to the doctor years ago, because I don't do well on medication, you ever take a pill and they say, be careful, it'll make you drowsy? Well, I'm running around for hours after I take these things. Then it says, won't cause drowsiness. I'm almost laying on the floor while I'm taking it already. So I asked the doctor, I said, can you give me, it was for like a sinus infection. I said, can you give me some medication without a side effect? And he said, there is no such thing. Even good leadership has a side effect. And one of the side effects is, because we have been reinforced for solutions all the time, and my cousin Al says we get juiced. It means when we give a solution, something releases in our body and we feel real good. And I'm as addicted to this as anyone in the United States of America. I love when people come up to me and say, Quint, we're having trouble with our door-to-dock time in the ED. What do you recommend? Well, thank you for coming to the guru of gurus here. Let me tell you what I would recommend. Let me tell you, and then I feel great when they leave because I have given them a solution. But see, then the next time I see them, they come up to me again. And I go, why don't they solve their own problems? Because I've reinforced them not to solve their own problems. So when you start creating what I call a mature adult culture, it's really where you now don't solve problems, but you force other people to bring solutions. And there's a very difficult transition to that because many people would rather bring a problem. Because if they would have brought solutions, they'd probably be in this room. Do any of you have anybody right now that every time you see them coming down the hall, you don't say, oh good, here comes Miss and Mr. Solution? I mean, do you get some emails and you say, yuck, 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 I don't want to even open that thing up? Here they come, they're going to complain, they're going to whine, they're going to bring me a problem. Probably at one time in their career, either they should have never been hired and now you're stuck with them, or somehow it was reinforced. When we look at physicians at our behavioral issues, we find that that probably could have been nipped very early on in their career. But they got away with it. And when they got away with it and no one ever confronted them, it got reinforced that they could get away with it. So sometimes we get there. So what we call park ranger leadership. What we say is if somebody gets lost in the woods, they're going to work like crazy to get out because they don't think anyone's going to rescue them. if after a certain amount of time, like a half hour, a park ranger shows up, they're going to be grateful. Now that park ranger has two options. He can do like I like to do. Oh yes, I saved your life, no big deal. Here's, write my boss if you don't mind. Anyway, you know, I can feel good and have a great conversation, or I can say, let me spend a little time talking about how to prevent this in the future. I can do some solution solving, critical thinking, but I wouldn't. So other people don't. Now, 3 years later, the person gets lost again. Now I got two thoughts. One, how do I get out? Two, I wonder if they have a park ranger here. Now, 3, 4 years go by, I get lost again. I have one thought. Where is that park ranger? You would have thought they'd been here by now, wouldn't you? I'm going to write a complaint. Not to say you do this, but sometimes if you find yourself getting a lot of problems, we might have subconsciously created that because at one time we got such juice for solving a problem, we like to solve the problem. And then they even feed us. Oh, thank you so much. Gosh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyway, something like that. Now, but what is our solution here? Well, we went and found some experts. They're called William and Susan Glaser, and they're out of Oregon, and they do communication consulting. So we asked them about this issue, and here's what they told us. When somebody brings you a problem, you ask them, now, by the way, this first thing I'm going to give you will not work. So after you fail with this one, you go to the one that will work. But you got to start here to get to here. You say to them, well, what do you think we should do? If you were in my position, how would you handle it? You know, some way like that. In environments, particularly where this hasn't been forced, there's a little bit of a safety fear, so people are more likely to try to avoid giving you an answer because the best way not to get in trouble in certain organizations and cultures is to lay low. Lay low. Stay under the radar screen and your head won't be shot at. So we lay low. So what they say is, I don't know. And when the person says, I don't know, this is what the Glacers taught us. Then say, well, if you did know, what would you recommend? And they say, well, if I did know, here's what I'd recommend. And 80% of the time, they at least throw something out there because you've now created a safer environment with that and how that was handled. So I bring that up because it's so an important thing because there's a side effect of good leadership. And you know, you wouldn't have had the success you've had over these years without some good leadership. And I don't mean like this guy, this lady, because you've got a nice reputation. You've grown to 12,000 students. You've done some nice jobs in philanthropy. And you're very common to who we normally talk to. I mean, we got hired by Advocate Good Samaritan because they were in like the 80s or the 77th percentile nationwide. One of the top 25% hospitals in the country, but they didn't like being in the top in 77. We get hired mostly by organizations that are already good, but for some reason they've got to get better. Okay? It's the external environment's going to be a lot tougher on them. The competition is changing. When we got hired in LA, it's because of transparency, because some of their clinical outcomes weren't as good as they wanted them to be, and now it was going to be transparent. So I better go back and fix these things right now before it gets, so there's all sorts of external pressure. But normally in most organizations we go to, and we're not going, this is just today, so I'm not, but their normal organizations are already pretty good. They actually got pockets that are really great. They got a lot of good and some real problem, a few problem areas. But one thing they can all agree on is there's inconsistency. And also the skills that got them to where they might be might not be the skills to keep them there. In healthcare, it's even to keep them there because reimbursement goes so much worse. How do we even stay where we're at? And then how do we even get better? So that's a little about off-the-cuff things. The other book you got is a book that just was released this week. It's called A Culture of High Performance. Even though it says for leaders, that's a free book, so it just came out. It came out 2 days ago for the first, I just saw it myself 2 days ago for the first time, and I think you'll like it. I think you'll like it. This book really talks a lot about change. It talks a lot, because to create a culture of high performance, I believe I believe no matter what profession you're in right now, we're going to be doing two things the rest of our lives: improving quality and lowering cost. How do we produce a better product, whether it's student retention, at a lower cost? And I just think that's going to be where we're going to be sitting probably the rest of our lives, the rest of our careers. It's how do you get better quality at a lower cost? So if you find this book, you'll like some things that have changed and some things that haven't changed. I think one of the things that's changed the most, and I'm a big fan of John Kotter. The article he wrote that was my favorite was in 1991. It was called Why Cultural Transformations Fail. There's a 70% failure rate in change. 70% of the time, the change will not work. And there's some very specific reasons why it doesn't work. Burning platform isn't spelled out well. So there's not a reason to change. Number two, you don't get a critical mass. And you got to get the critical mass. You know, Malcolm Caldwell showed that, the tipping point. You got to get the critical mass. Number three, you have to do enough stuff to get some success, to build self-confidence in the organization, and then you can't declare victory. John Kotter also says that one of the biggest mistakes that CEOs make, or presidents make, is they think there's more urgency in a system than there is. So if you'd like to do for free, we can have you take what we call an urgency assessment. And it's really not here. You have to fill out 17 questions, and you get to know how much urgency do you really have. Now, you would think in healthcare, we did this, by the way, with 34,197 leaders in healthcare, 500 healthcare systems. You would think with everything in healthcare that people would have some urgency. And what we found out is 37% of the people, when asked the question, if you stay exactly the same, so let me pretend I'm asking this question at University of West Georgia. If you stay exactly the same, means same processes, same volume, same tools, same techniques, same productivity levels, will your results over the next 5 years be much better, the same, worse, or much worse? Now remember, in healthcare, it's a whole reimbursement issue. Everybody knows reimbursement's probably going to get less than more. Hospitals just can't raise prices because most of their payment now is funded by either an insurance company, an employer, or the government, who's the biggest. We've had government health care since 1965. For 50% of all people that get health care are paid for by a government, by the way. So when people say, what do you think about government-sponsored health care? I said, well, it's had some ups and downs for the last 45 years, 46. So I don't know how you might be lucky. You might live in a place where reimbursement's not an issue, that you can raise your tuition as much as you want, when you want it. Maybe there's certain funding that's just coming your way no matter what. But in healthcare, people all know there's less money. It's less money for more people. So their answer is probably different than yours. But 37% of healthcare people in leadership, below the C-suite, below the top executives, feel if I stay the same, our results are going to be the same, better, or much better. So here you got all these executives doing lean and doing Six Sigma and doing process improvement when 37% of the people don't plan on doing it anyway. So the first thing you got to do is create that burning platform in that sense of urgency. So that's a lot about that book, Culture of High Performance. It's a lot about managing change, the process of change, how to create the burning platform, how to use research. There's a lot of research today. There's so much research on employee engagement. There's so much research now in the last 10 years. I got asked, I did a thing for a think tank this last week, and they taped it, and it's on, I think it's on a website, IHMC, and basically it was a consumer group, and they asked me what questions to ask when you're going to get health care. And I said, well, first of all, you can go to these websites. You can go look at how the clinical outcome is here. But I would ask, how much employee turnover do you have? They looked at me like, employee turnover? I said, yeah, there's direct correlation between employee turnover and deaths. The lower the turnover in a hospital, the less deaths they are. Now, what we call it's called mortality index. But that's it. Now, you might think, well, you're kidding me. Well, sure there are. You have new people, you have bad handoffs. You have new people, you have bad you don't have as consistent explanations. So they said, wow, I said, of course, the other thing you could ask for is their employee engagement results, because there's a direct correlation between employee engagement and patient safety. There's direct correlation between employee engagement and workarounds. So if your employees aren't engaged in the University of West Florida, or West Georgia, excuse me, they suck the life out of their coworkers. They hurt you with student retention, and they basically do a lot of workarounds. Has anybody ever worked with a coworker that you worked around? You take a lot of energy. It takes a lot of work. So those are some things that you can look at. So there's even a lot of chapter in there on research and what research has shown. So let me show you. Whoop, thought I had it right. There we go. Okay. This is about us, and Kyle did a nice job with that. We're always learning, we're always writing, we're always researching, and so on. This is what most people see as what we sort of go by and sort of our foundation. I'm going to do a couple foundation slides. We got this feeling that most people want to have a life that has purpose, they do worthwhile work and make a difference. Now, as a leader, and you're all leaders in here, your job is to help everyone that you work with understand that's what they do. Now, I think we're lucky in education because it's right in front of us. I think we're lucky in healthcare because it's right in front of us. But I believe if you're a good leader, you can do that in almost any industry. Our baseball team has a net promoter score. Net promoter score is how many people rank you a 9 or 10 of a 92.8. That's better than a Ritz-Carlton. Okay, our mascot, Kazoo, truly knows that he makes people's lives better. So if we can, our ushers, so how do we do that? So your job as a leader is to help your employees know what they do make a difference. Now you might think, and I might think, my God, how can they not know that? I mean, especially your faculty members. I mean, how many of you supervise faculty members? And when you say, how are you doing today? Probably the number one comment you say is, I'm doing great. I'm doing sacred work. I'm doing work with purpose. It's worthwhile and it's making a difference. They might not. Even people that do purposeful work tend to forget they're doing purposeful work because they tend to focus on the problems instead of the solutions. They tend to look at what's wrong instead of what's right. Now, we can also have ownership of that. The other key thing of a flywheel, and a flywheel is a device you know that turns, and the flywheel is the fact that we want to get everybody turning in the right way. There's a whole part in there, a guy named Ed Goldberg on the flywheel, because even one person not moving well with the flywheel can impact negatively the rest of the people. So the second why is, can everyone who's in a leadership position explain the decisions that are being made at the University of West Georgia without blaming someone else for the decision? Because if you don't, you create a we they. And I will show you how that could happen. And your first name?
Jim.
Jim, okay. Let's say that somebody asked for some resources, okay, and I want to handle it. You saw Judy Bentz put you in a we they. She locked you into a we they. Now you get credit for handling the we they, but it's not the best culture. Because you should never put a person in a position to carry a tough message when you're in the leadership role, because you should have the guts enough and the courage enough to carry that message. That's my whole philosophy, is people respect people that will don't ask people to do something that they should be doing, could be doing, and so on. But let me explain. I don't have any leadership skills right now. I've never been trained. I've been promoted from within, and you asked me for some resources. And I can say, oh, if it was up to me, you'd have it. I mean, it's really not up to me. You know how Jim is. Tight, tight, tight. Yeah. Dr. Doom right here in front of me. Now, what happens is, I did that. I was a professional at that. Now, the way you diagnose it is you do an employee engagement survey. And if employees love their boss but hate everybody else in the organization, you probably have someone that we theys. And many times it's subconscious. And you're really fortunate in Georgia because you can even blame the government. Can't you? It's up to me to get a pay raise. You know how the state is. Anyways, But the reality is if we want to really have the right organization, every leader needs to know how to handle the tough question. Why do they get resources and we don't? I mean, you ever notice how people in an organization know what other people get? And you think, I wish you knew our department as well as you do theirs. You know, yeah. How come the nursing school got a big new building? How come they get all this stuff? We get nothing. My God, what's going on here? You know, not that that would happen. So the second thing is the we, they. Now, how do you do that? Only through a lot of skill development and training. Only through an organization that's totally transparent. Because if you're not transparent, I can yell without that mic. We'll just get it for the next one. If we're not transparent, how can I answer the question? So it really takes a lot of guts in the top because you got to open up the data. You got to open up the information. You got to let it flow. And you also have to help people figure out how to answer those questions. So the next part of the flywheel is called passion. So when you go to passion, I'll put on later. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Can you hear me? When you go to passion, can you hear me okay?
I can hear everything you're saying.
Pardon? Can you hear me?
I can hear everything you're saying.
Okay, because I'm hearing impaired. I'm deaf on my right side, and I only hear a little bit on my left side. That's why I have these mechanical devices. So I have to look at visual things, so I don't hear you sometimes. I look at your facial expression. So if you think I suck, just smile. I'll never know it. Hey, God, is he bad? Yeah. Research shows it takes 3 compliments to every 1 criticism for a person to feel good about another human being. Now, the challenge in most of our industry and professions, we're there to focus on what's wrong, particularly in the American education system. Let me give you some research. Gallup, they did research of parents of 43 countries, and they gave the parents a pretend report card and said, this is your kid's report card. It had all good grades and 1 not so good grade. In every country but 1, the parents started out on the positive part. There was only 1 country where the parents went right after the negative grade. What do you think it was? We have a tendency to look at what's wrong, and that cascades down. Now, Kyle, how long have you been here?
About 122 days.
122 days. Has he got a probationary period? Okay, 122 days. Now, if you get an email from Kyle, not one of these group things, but personally, and it's normally positive, when you see it, you'll feel pretty good. But the reality is, it takes 3 positives to 1 negative for a person to feel better about another human being. 2 to 1 is negative, 1 to 1. 2 to 1 is neutral, 1 to 1 is negative. We have cultures that are built on negativity. So why do we feel bad about other departments? When do we hear from them? You know, you're facilities people. Anybody here over facilities and engineering? Yeah. Well, when I talk to them, if they show up, and I talk to them this afternoon, I will ask them how many phone calls have they gotten in their life at the University of West Georgia where somebody said temperature's good. And I will tell you what the answer will be. Never has happened. So one of the cultures you have to do to create a consistent culture of high performance is not stay away from the negative. We got to fix it, but you also got to look at the positive or people get wore out. Next is prescriptives or principles, which we do, and next is results, because why do we do this? We have to get results. When Jim Collins did his work on Good to Great, the question he got is, how do these great companies sustain their greatness? He said they get results. Because if we get results, we keep doing the behavior. If we don't get the results, we change our behavior, which is sometimes not bad, because we're going to hit a plateau. We got to relook and do some process and move on. Now, this is just the phases, and I'm going to go through the phases because I think we do a lot with this, and this makes a lot of sense. This is, again, taken from a lot of John Cotter's early work, but I've moved from 5 to 4. He maybe do 5, but that's where it's based on. We find any change process, there's a honeymoon period. For example, Kyle could possibly be on a bit of a honeymoon, possibly. Or if something new is introduced, we get excited. We're pumped. How long's your nursing facility been there?
Since June.
You're on a honeymoon. It's feeling pretty good, feeling pretty good. There's a sense of excitement. This is the right thing to do. Things are going to get better. We're going to have more transparency. We're going to have more openness. We're going to have more participatory leadership. We're going to have data. This is good. And this is not based on University of West Georgia. This is based on wherever we go. Whether it's even, do you know? And this at one time, people were excited about electronic health record. They really were. Oh, God, is this going to be great? We're going to not duplicate tests. We're going to, it's going to be wonderful. We're going to talk to each, we're going to be able to communicate with each other. We're going to be able to see what other people are doing. This is great. When did people not like the electronic health record? Does anybody know? When it started getting implemented. Because, oh my gosh, this is so much harder than I thought. So the next phase is we-they. This sounded good, but I didn't know it was going to impact me. I didn't know I was going to have to make some changes too, including the top person. It's just so much bigger than I thought. It's so much bigger because we got this. I thought transparency was good until I found out it was mine, until I found out my stuff was going to be out there. I say that in Advocate Good Samaritan, every day they post doctors, operating room timeliness. So every time they get to see who was, and they all want to be 100% because they don't want to be less. But they didn't like it at first, I guarantee you, unless you're 100%. Bigger than I thought. And you know what? We're more inconsistent than I thought. Like our little meeting today, we thought there could be some inconsistency. You might do things, Scott, different than Jim. Now, we believe Jim and I talked, and we should do it like he's doing it. but I wrote an article for CFOs one time. It was for CFOs, and I wrote an article. Most CFOs believe they're really good leaders. It just comes with the turf, because they are pretty good. They set metrics, they set goals, they're objective measurement, they have rules, they have processes, and you follow them. So I had an article one time by CFOs in a CFO magazine, was ranked the best article ever written for that year. And here's my first line. If you're in finance, you're probably thinking you're one of the better leaders in the organization. You're probably thinking if everybody did things like you did, life would be better. You're right. You are one of the best leaders in the organization. Now, that could have been why they voted my article, the best article. Now, the challenge is we all start out pretty pumped, and then we realize now that we're reducing variance. And now let's talk about the Holy Grail here. It's called about reducing variance. It's called about all agreeing in leadership. What are some things we should all be doing the same? Whether it be hiring, whether it be communicating, whether it be answering questions, because we like consistency when it's anybody but us. And so what we do is now we have to agree, but it's based on some best practices. It's not based on just here's what I think. At that time, it starts becoming evident some are getting it and some are not. And plus, we now have better metrics because we're doing more measurement. So that lasts a bit, and then we go into phase 3, which I call the Chuck Yeager phase of change. If you ever watch the movie The Right Stuff, Chuck Yeager hits when he's trying to break the speed barrier, and the whole thing starts shaking. And now the reason the speed thing of speed wasn't broke before was because let's think of human psychology. You're driving your car down the road and it starts shaking. You don't sit here and say, this is a signal to press down on the accelerator, isn't it? We would slow down. Yet in change, you got to keep your throttle down. Yet it's more comfortable to back off for a while. But once you back off for a while, then you start jerking the organization. Because we start making the change, there's too much pushback, too much unrest, people are writing the board of trustees, they write blah, 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 and you have to have a strong-legged board if you want to be great, because you got to make changes. About 20% of the people, when we go in an organization, people say, again, we're not here, but when we go to organizations, people say, about how many leaders don't make it? And it's about 20%. 20% of the leaders don't make the full journey. Now, some of them don't like the changes and they deselect out, or some of them are asked to leave, because when you start reducing variance, you change an organization based on best practices. because you start noticing inconsistency. Because when you all agree on a certain process, that's when you notice the inconsistency, when you start doing the deal. I don't know how out of shape I am right now, but I know one way to find out is try to get in shape. Because if I try to get in shape, I say, whoa, I'm a lot more out of shape than I thought I was out of shape. So when you agree to certain consistencies, you notice the inconsistency. But if you keep the throttle down and make these tough decisions, then you go into really where you want to be. And what I hope you want to be is the absolute best education place in the world to go to. I hope you want to be a place where students are lined up trying to get in here. And the only reason I'm going to Emory is because I couldn't get into West Georgia. The only reason I went to Vanderbilt is they didn't have an opening at West Georgia. Gosh, you mean I got to be on the faculty of these other universities? But I want to be at West Georgia. I don't want to be at Yale. I don't want to be at Princeton. I want to be at West Georgia. So you want to create an environment that is really spectacular. And I sort of like that. I sort of like that. You'll read in the book and people say, well, it's not the best, but let's go for better. And it's really going to be neat, because if you look at universities across the country, and I talk to them, it's going to all be about who can attract the best students, retain the best students, and can grow. And in order to do that, you got to attract and retain the best faculty. And you can't go to the student unless you get the faculty. The big mistake they make in healthcare is they think you figure out the patient. The way you fix the patient is by making it a best place to work. Then you get the best place to get care. The way West Georgia becomes the best place for students is only when you create the best place for people to work. And if you can't make it the great place for people to work, you're never going to make it the best place for students. And that's really the challenge. And the only way you do that is you create the best leaders. And it's a tremendous investment in leadership development. I always say you can tell the values of an organization on how much time and effort they put in and money into training leaders. How can I ask you, as a faculty member, to now supervise and lead some of the most wannabe autonomous people in the entire world without training and development? I'm setting you up for failure. Just because you're intelligent in what you are doesn't mean you have the skills. When you read this book, I'll tell you my own story about my own skill building in my 40s when I went to a program on how to do something that I thought I knew, only to find out once I got there I didn't know it. So let me go to the next thing. This is the level you also go through as an individual. And as an individual, we all have people that go through this. Does anybody have anybody you've recently promoted to a supervisory position? Okay, how long they been there?
From when until when?
They're in a brand new supervisory position, first time ever a 1st of October. So they've been in there less than 30 days. Do you know they like the job?
I believe
They love it. They love it. You know why they love it? They have no idea what they've just signed up for. None. None. Just like,
Okay.
I love it here, love it here, love it here. Kyle, I saw Dr. Murrell socks when I pulled up here today. Anyway, so the reality is we'll go out of that phase quick. We don't even have to get them out of that phase. It's like the first time. Anybody remember your first time in a classroom? I taught. That's my background. I taught. High school. I remember I'm in the high school class, and this kid is sitting there with this white shirt and a tie, like a half hour before it starts. It's 1973, okay? And all of a sudden the bell rings, he takes off. Now he sat there a half hour, the bell rang, and he takes off. Now I got all these other students that come in. I've been teaching less than a minute, and I don't know how to handle the situation. Do I go and call that this guy ran out, but then I got to leave my classroom, go down into an office, find a phone, and call that this guy took off out of my class? But then what happens to my class? But if I stay in my class and he's just out causing trouble or running around, or he's suicidal for all I know, what do? Do you know that most people cry the first job? They go home and wonder, did I make a mistake? Does anybody have Kleenex for Kyle right now? Did I make a mistake? So what they do is they get consciously unskilled. And you know what we do? Many times nothing. Many times we let them bury those feelings and feel that feeling, particularly in a classroom situation because we're not observing it. Particularly in a situation where they think, my gosh, I have a PhD, I'm supposed to be able to do this stuff. I'm supposed to be able to handle this stuff. And if I go tell somebody I can't handle it, they're not going to like it. They're going to think I'm overwhelmed. They're going to think I'm maybe not the right choice. I doubt if Kyle's going to go to the board at University of West Georgia and say, I'm a little overwhelmed. I'm scared. I might be incompetent, but I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work hard. So we've created a culture where we don't agree to be vulnerable. And in my book, Culture of High Performance, I say if you don't create a safe environment for people and leaders to be vulnerable, you'll never be good. Because how do you get better? By being vulnerable, by telling people what you don't know. So a big part of this, we believe, to be a great organization, you have to put the commitment in developing people. Because if you don't develop leaders, they can't develop their faculty. If we don't develop faculty, you can't develop students. If you don't develop students, you don't retain students and attract students, and you never become the best you can be. Even though you might never win an award, the best you can be is making sure people leave here and make a good quality life for themselves and for others. So our goal is to get people from consciously unskilled to consciously skilled, because then you have a better organization. Now, if you do it frequently enough, you become unconsciously skilled, which means you've done it so much, it's natural. It's just natural. It's like that phone or that computer that now it was a frustration, but now that you got it nailed, you can almost do it. How many of you have ever been on a phone call and doing other work on the computer at the same time? That's called unconsciously skilled. You can multitask. Now, let me give you one tough thing for the people in this room who consider themselves at that level. It's really, really good, but it also can be real frustrating and change. Because even you might be asked to do something differently, and you're thinking, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm like the best you got. Why don't you let them catch up to me? Then I'll make the change. So one of the big challenges is even high performers don't like change unless they are running it. Ralph Waldo Emerson says people like to be settled, but as only by unsettling them is there any real hope. And you know what you all are? You're professional unsettlers. So you come into an environment and you're trying to unsettle people that don't want to be unsettled. So how do you handle that? You handle that by understanding the change process. And that's what I've gone through here. Where are you? If you're already very competent, then let's talk about I need you to make some changes to be a role model for the good of the organization. If you're already skilled, all we're asking to do is do it a little differently. If you're already consciously unskilled, you're the best person in the classroom because you're willing to be the best student because you know you need to be helpful. So let's go through a few other things. What time is this over?
3:30. You got.
Oh, great. So, not that you would have it here, but we work with organizations, and there are little pieces that crop up. Number one is denial. You know, I don't know about education, but let me tell you about healthcare. Here's what visionary looks like in healthcare. First of all, when change comes, we start backing up. And then we back up as far as we can, and then we hit a wall. When we hit a wall, we quit backing up only because we can't back up. And then knives start pointing into our back. And then the pain gets so bad, we take a step forward and said, I'm going to be visionary and move forward. Most of the time, we change when we have to. That's just life. We change when we have to. Most of the time, we get the learning when we need it. Seriously, we don't think about going through a whole course on how to fire people if we don't need to fire anyone. How many of you ladies, like, had a kid, like pushed one out? Okay. And were you, this is so politically incorrect. Anyway, let's say you were married before you got pregnant and had the baby. Was anybody married before they had a baby? Okay, good. At least 9 months, okay? How long were you married before you had your first baby? 3 years. Now, did you go to any type of childbirth classes?
No.
No.
Well, not until the very end.
Right.
Like a month before.
Right. Why didn't you go right away when you got married? Because you had more time before you had the kid.
Yeah, good point.
So when do we go to childbirth classes? When we're pregnant. You also need to create a learning environment that's got some just-in-time learning capability. Because I'm probably going to make me aware of how to hire, but I might not be to be an expert until I'm really hiring. So you also, because otherwise you overwhelm an organization. There's the whole rationalization. The biggest rationalization is usually lack of resources. Lack of people, lack of resources. There's blame. There's blame. We just find somebody to blame. We can blame the government. We can blame our leader. We can blame somebody. And if you need somebody to blame, I can tell you people to blame. You just blame. We don't like the discomfort. We don't like the discomfort. And by discomfort, let me tell you, discomfort means that we're doing things that maybe we haven't done. For example, we're a big believer, and you do it here, I'm sure, that staff should have strong influence on who their coworkers are. That staff should be involved in all hiring processes. Because now, you have to be sensitive. If you have problems with discrimination, you got to look at your panels, because else your panels might discriminate at the hiring process. So you have to do this scientifically, and you have to train people. You have to use a matrix, so it's not just, what do you think? You have to do it, but we know research shows that when peers are involved in hiring their peers, it's a better selection process. Now, I've had leaders tell me, I don't like that. I don't like giving up the selection process to somebody else. Then they say, what if they hire somebody I wouldn't hire? Well, we say, well, don't let them meet those people. Because you're screening them. You're screening the individual. I mean, you've got say-so on who they meet, okay? And then one of them, I told the group earlier, this happened in Reno, Nevada. A guy pulled me inside and said, I can't do that. I said, why not? He said, if they meet some of the people they're going to work with, they won't come. I said, well, you got a bigger issue. You got a bigger issue. So that's uncomfortable. That's uncomfortable. So there are uncomfortable things that happen when we start making some changes. Sometimes there's discomfort with transparency of data. You know, if you're doing student satisfaction with the teacher that gets bad rankings, so that's because I'm the toughest teacher in this entire organization. That's because I make the kids work harder than anybody else makes them work. That's because I hold their feet to the ground, and that's why they don't like me. And then you find another teacher that is just as tough, just as demanding, but has good, and you say, wonder why that is. So there, you have to look and why that happens. And I think the number one reason is lack of skill. There's lack of consistent skill building in an organization. How many of you have been at the University of West Georgia in a leadership position for more than 5 years? Okay, good. How many times have you gone to skill building on how to select talent? So the University of West Georgia uses one technique in hiring. You all do it together, and you validate you're good in hiring, because hiring is the most important process you can ever do. How many of you have attended a course like that in the last 5 years? Lack of skill. Not lack of potential skill, and you might have skill in hiring, but it's an inconsistent skill of hiring, so why not do the absolute best practice? Now, we don't think strategy is a big issue. Most people have. You know, I bet you every university wants to be the best. How's that one? I'm not sure they want to have staff satisfaction. I'm amazed in education. You won't believe this probably, but do you know in a lot of universities and colleges, the people say that the most important people are the staff? Have you ever heard that one? You're the lifeblood of our organization. You're the most important people in our organization. And do you know, you'll find this hard to believe, with all the rhetoric, they don't even measure what they're talking about. They don't measure how the staff feel. They don't measure, does the staff feel rewarded? Does the staff feel developed? Does they have good meetings that they go to? Is there fairness in the organization? Is there reward and recognition in the organization? It's hard to believe that it doesn't get measured in education. Why do you think it doesn't get measured in education? I think sometimes the big guy at the top is scared that it might not look good. Then there's this whole idea, not here of course, that the staff are whiners. They're going to point out what's wrong. They're going to have revenge. But you don't know. You know what I find about people in education? And one of the first things we do when we go in an organization is we don't measure it because we're not, but we make sure they measure this stuff. You know what I find? People are pretty good about it. They have good ethics, good integrity. They tell you what they feel, and you get a chance to talk about it, improve it, and make a big difference. If you want to have the best university, you have to have the most engaged staff. The only way you know how to engage the staff is to diagnose them. Can you imagine if you ever went to a doctor, and you can't, by the way, doctors don't believe you sometimes. I want you to know that. Doctors diagnose you with their ears, but even then they say, why don't we do a lab draw? Do you know there's never been a person that's gone to an ER that thought they were intoxicated? They've always had two, real big ones, but two. So the reality is we have to do tests, and you diagnose. So how you diagnose how faculty feel, you have a professional come in and you diagnose it. It's really neat, really wonderful. You find out what's going on. Structure looks about the same almost everywhere, so it comes down to execution. Now, what are the three elements of execution? The number one thing is accountability. So you have to have accountability, or you can count on me. And we'll talk about what accountability looks like. If you get accountability, you get consistency and reliability. Because no matter where a person works, they should have a good leader here. No matter where they work, they should have a good supervisor. I guarantee you, if some of you have looked to get out of the University of West Georgia, it wasn't because you didn't like what you do, because you are spending time. Well, what do you do?
I'm the faculty senate chair.
Okay. What was your academic background?
Sports science.
Sports science. You like sports science?
Absolutely.
Probably a good thing to do, right? So it's not the sports science you don't like, it's your boss. Not you, talking in general. But the reality is, it's the supervisor issue. So if we want to have a great university, we got to have consistency. So no matter where you work, you get the same communication. No matter where you work, you get the same development. No matter where you work, you get the same reward and recognition. No matter where you work, if there's a person who's a performance issue, they're dealt with and handled and removed from the organization if they can't make it, because they can't, it's not fair to have them suck the life out of other people in the organization. Now, so how do you get consistency? Because wherever we go, people say, we need more consistency and more reliability. You don't shoot for consistency and reliability, you shoot for accountability. And that drives consistency and reliability. So let's go into the next one here. This is really our approach, and I'm going to end it right now after a few more slides, about 2 or 3. Basically, we believe in evidence-based leadership, evidence-based management. Most of you have heard of Carnegie Mellon. They come to our sessions. They actually came and said, we might have more research on evidence-based leadership than any other company because we have so many. We have 80,000 people in our database with their metrics. So what we believe, most people like to focus in on behavior. They really do. They like to jump in the middle of the pool. Here's how we wish everyone would behave. Okay, the challenge is accountability. So our philosophy is it all starts with sitting down with people in leadership positions and talking about how you're going to be evaluated. And it might not be the same because it might be weighted differently. So for example, one person might be evaluated on staff's engagement more than another. One person might be evaluated on student retention. One person might be evaluated on student learning. Who knows? I don't know your system, but you figure out the goals that work for you. It's a collaborative effort. Now, who's here, anybody here in athletics, involved in athletics? Okay. Some of your measurement, not everywhere, periodically there are some schools that one of the objective measurements they use is the won and loss record. Okay, that's one of the rules. Some of them, though, put other incentives in there. They put retention, they put grade point, they put graduation. I mean, they put things in there. So what you do, though, but at least you know the rules now. What we find is missing is usually weighting. So what really counts? If I tell you, you know, coach, graduation rates are really important here, okay? In fact, it's 5% of your evaluation, and 95% is winning and losing. What am I really telling you? it's not that important to graduate your students. Now, if I tell you 50% of your evaluation is based on graduation, now all of a sudden it's a whole different ballgame. So what we try to do, and let me explain. How do high performers like an objective weighted evaluation system? Anybody know? They love it. They've been waiting for this their whole life. They said, my God, I'm glad I didn't die before this was implemented in education. I thought I'd be a dead person. They love it. How do sort of middle or average or solid performers like it? They're a little, I don't know. I'd like to look at it a little bit. I'm a little anxious, but I'm willing to see. It depends on the goals, depending on the process, which is okay. How do subpar performers like this type of system? They hate it. Why do they hate it? Because they can't manipulate the organization anymore. So one of the things we find out in our journey, people start separating. There's people that move their skills up and stay in the high-performing area. Coach, there's people when you work with them and give them the skill building, they move into high, or there's some really good middle performers and you need them. You can't have all superstars, but you need a good group of solid performers that play hard every day and know what they're doing. Then you get what we call subpar performers. And then we actually have a system where everyone is met with individually, and they don't have to say you're a high, middle, low, but you tell them exactly where their performance is, where it needs to be, and you move the highs and the middles. And then you leave the lows to the end, but now they're being sort of lonely out there. And then you have a conversation and you let them know that the University of West Georgia, just role playing, is their goal is to be here. Why? Better student learning, better work environment for the staff, better place for parents to send their children. And it's really exciting where this organization's going. And if they're a high performer, you tell them, we really want you to be a part of this, and let me tell you why. And is there anything that I need to do to keep you? And high performers will actually ask for more. Then you go to your middle performers, your solid performers, and what do they want? Development and training. You tell them you're excited about where University of West Georgia is going, let me tell you where, and I want you to be a part of it. And let me tell you, our investment we're making in you, because we have a long-term commitment to your skill, because we're committed to you being the best. Coach, you tell that to a player who wants to play for you. What do they want? I came here so you would make me better. Then you go to your low performer, and you tell them it's not a positive meeting. You go over the criteria why they're not meeting expectations, what they need to do to meet expectations, how you're going to help them meet expectations. But if they don't meet it by a certain time frame, there's going to be some serious changes made. 1/3 of those people you have the conversation with will actually improve performance and you will save their career. 1/3 of them will find another place to work. And 1/3 of them will eventually, you'll have to ask to leave the organization. But when you do, everybody gets confidence. This is not a program. This is not an initiative. This is not a buzzword. This is truly about doing the right thing for the right reasons. Now, once the evaluation system is set, we got to look at the skill building. Because if we're raising the bar, we're all working as hard as we can. We need better skills, better systems, better processes, more efficiency, more effectiveness, maybe even better technology to get this stuff done. So that's called aligning goals. Next, we say, well, if we're going to really do this, what's the behavior that's mandatory? Both in our leadership and our staff level. What's mandatory behavior? Now, once we do the mandatory behavior, we're going to have people fall into what we call performance management. So how do you re-recruit the high? How do you develop the middle? And how do you have those conversations with the low? Because just like all boats go with the rising tide, all boats go with the lowering tide. And if you've studied Peter Senge at all in his work on the fifth discipline, if you have some low performers in your organization, they will pull the organization down on a continuous basis and wear it out. A minority group a small group of low performers can inadvertently influence a large group of high and middle performers. And so that's where we're going to have to work. And Coach, you've been there. You ever dropped a person from the team and the whole team got better with one less player? If it's the right player you released. I remember one time on the baseball game, we had a ball player who was signing autographs during a game. That wasn't the big deal, but he was putting his phone number on it. And why do you think he was putting his phone number on it? Because who was he giving it to? Girls in the crowd. So that day, the manager came in, brought him into the love house, and released him from the organization. Even though it would have been cheaper to drive him back because we weren't done on a road trip, they released him on the spot. Then he took a baseball, put that guy's name on it, put a piece of tape on it, put it in the ceiling. Never said a word. Team won about 7 or 8 games in a row. He made the point, we're not going to let a few people destroy what we're trying to do here as an organization, which means we always have to look at standardization. We align processes. What processes must be in place throughout the entire organization, and what technology will help us make sure we validate and make sure we have good processes. So if you look at it in a circle, everything drops into that. Do you have the right process and technology? Do you identify the behavior? Healthcare is a perfect thing. Nurse goes into a room. Aren't you defining the process they should use?
Yes.
Aren't you telling them the technology? You're telling them the goal? Your entire college is meant to teach skills, right?
Well, thinking.
Okay, well, that's a skill. What behavior? What behavior? And your performance managing. That's what we do. These 3 circles is what we do as leaders on a continuous basis, or on teachers on a continuous basis. So, never underestimate the difference that you can make in people's lives. We got a few more minutes, and let me explain real quickly just a little bit about my life, and then 15 minutes, right? I don't hear well. I don't hear hardly at all. Hardly at all. And by the way, being a hospital president, not hearing is not a bad deal. Kyle even said, I never thought about being hearing impaired, but since I got here, is there anything I should be doing? And even though his wife's an opera singer, and I hope she doesn't take this wrong, I said, put some headphones on, put some Led Zeppelin on, and crank it up to 10. So if you see Kyle in the morning and you say, how you doing, Kyle? And he says, I got a whole lot of love, love, love. Kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade was hard, but in 3rd grade I got a teacher named Mrs. James. Mrs. James changed my life. She did a couple things. She taught me how to read. And she broke a rule or some process, I guess. I didn't read out of books. I read out of sports pages because she knew I liked sports. I read Jerome Holtzman in the Chicago Tribune. I learned how to read, reading sports pages. You know what else? I got real good at math. Because sports is a lot of math. So I'm really good in math, okay? People say, why you're good in math? Because I know I want to figure out these sports things. So Mrs. James helped me learn how to read. You know why I did it with Mrs. James? Because I liked her, because she liked me. I felt very comfortable when I sat down with Mrs. James that I wouldn't feel stupid. See, there's something about that when you tell people you care about them. When you care about people, you focus in and you spend time with them. You develop them. You're interested in them. That's what leadership is. 6th grade, I had Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry quickly moved the seating arrangement. He took my desk and he put it right next to his. The whole entire class was facing the blackboard. We were in the back of the room. His desk, my desk. We co-taught the entire 6th grade. Because Mr. Fry read my 4th and 5th grade teacher reports. Disruptive in class. Bothers people. Doesn't pay attention. He said, I got to keep this kid close. He kept me right next to him. And you know what he did? He helped me when everybody was learning. Because when you're hearing impaired, you're normally 3 years behind the rest of the school because you're missing so many things. He kept me right close to him. You know what he figured? I'm going to keep him busy. I was grading papers. I was working the whole entire year. You know what else? He told my mom he liked me. My mom had terrible 4th and 5th grade teacher conferences. 6th grade, it's unbelievable. My mom came home and I was waiting for, you got to shape up, you got to behave better, blah, blah, blah. She comes in, she said, Mr. Fry really likes you. He said you have a bundle of energy. 2 teachers think I'm hyperactive. He thinks I'm a bundle of energy. I go to high school. I go to the biggest high school in the Illinois area, 5,300 kids. I like sports, but I'm small. I'm not that good athletically. So I decided to go out for a new sport. 1965, they announced they're going to start a new sport, and I don't know anything about it, but I don't want to run. That's cross country. Seems like that's a lot of work. Football, I'm too little. So soccer. You got a ball? I think it's got to be okay. I didn't think you ran that much. I was wrong. Anyway, so I go out for soccer. I run a guy named Coach King. Coach King. And I'm going to kick a ball, and all of a sudden I miss it. And I hear Coach King go, "Good job. Way to get over there. Way to hustle. Nice work." See, when I missed the ball and I knew the coach saw me, you know what I went into? I'm afraid. I'm going to get yelled at. You know what he did? He motivated me to keep running. I can tell you a good coach or a bad coach within seconds. Good coaches keep people to keep running. You know what we do in our cultures? We only hear from our leader when there's something wrong. We only get communicated to when there's a problem. So what happens is the best way to not have a bad communication is to try to do as little as you can, lay under the sideline, and even if we used to take a risk, we quit taking risk because it's just better not to take a risk than take a risk and get in trouble. So Coach King taught me a valuable lesson. My junior year in soccer, I got cut by another coach. My senior year, I got a 1.3 grade point. I'm not doing well in school, same old crud. And all of a sudden, 2 weeks before school starts, my senior year, I get a phone call from Lee Benesack, who happens to be a classmate. And the school hasn't started yet, but soccer has. And he said, "Hey, Coach King wants to know why you're not out for soccer." I said, "Coach King's the varsity coach." He said, "No, I said, "Coach King's the sophomore coach." He said, no, he's the new varsity coach. Coach King got promoted, and he told me to come out for soccer. And I did. I got a letter. Made a big deal to me, a letter sweater. Made me feel part of. Coach King continued to change my life. I had a study hall. You ever notice the worse you do in school, the more study halls they give you to study, less classes? So anyway, if you had 2 study halls, one you could go do something else. So Coach King wrote a note, and I got to go into his classroom. And when I went to his classroom, I had one job. After the bell rang, I took his male students, and I walked them to the library. I sat with them at the table, and then 5 minutes before class change, I walked them back to their class. See, Coach King taught, now we'd call it different, but back then it was called mentally retarded kids. And when somebody was with them in the hallways, they didn't get teased, they didn't get joked or sat with them in the cafeteria. So they tried to not have them in the hallways so they wouldn't get teased. But if I sat with them because even though I wasn't a good student, I had a bit of popularity. I was big in the parking lot for sure. Anyway, I got put in my Hall of Fame. I said, I don't know anybody who went to my school unless you hung out in the parking lot. Anyway, so Coach King got me to feel purpose, worthwhile work, and making a difference. Well, then my senior year in high school, second semester my senior year, they're giving out the ACT, and my cousin's a junior. He goes to take it. He says, "Come with me." So I go with him. I go score really good scores. Kent Taylor, the counselor, calls me in and calls my parents in, and we got an issue now. We got this smart kid that's nobody knew it. And they said, "We got to get you into college because I can't go in the military back then. I don't have any years." So then there's no school in Illinois that would accept me, because I never took foreign languages because I wasn't in a college prep program. So they found a school in Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. It's one of the greatest schools in the country for wheelchair sports. It's the school in Wisconsin that's designated for people with special needs. In fact, it's got a pretty good sports program, you know. They've won 6 out of the last 7 years. They played for the national championship in football with Lance Leopold. Meller, their basketball coach, they won the national championship in football and basketball one year. Only University of Florida has done the same. So anyway, I go there. And then I take my basic courses, and they ask me what I want to major in. And all I could think of were teachers. My parents never went to college. Teachers. Mrs. James, Mr. Fry, Coach King. And I ended up picking a major, and I picked teaching. And they said, "What do you want to teach?" Well, I was real worried because I can't spell. I can't sound out words. What do you teach if you can't spell? And I thought of Coach King's kids, and I said, I want to be and they said a special ed teacher, and I became a special ed teacher. And there I met Mrs. Kopus. Mrs. Kopus was the secretary of the special ed department. Whenever I went to see a teacher, because I found out if you go see them, you get better grades. And whenever I went and talked to them, they seemed to be helpful. But Mrs. Kopus always reduced my anxiety. And she was a secretary. But she always made me feel good. So when my wife and I funded the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater Diagnostic Center for diagnosing children with special needs, they asked me would I like it named after us, and I said no, it's named after Florence Kopis. Her husband was a pig farmer. And she came to the dedication and she said, I never thought I would have something named after me. See, Mrs. Kopis was a pebble in my pond. Coach King was a pebble in my pond. Mrs. James, Mr. Fry, you guys are pebbles in a pond. You guys make a huge difference. Never underestimate the impact you make. A pebble hits water that hits water. Even a pebble in a pond impacts things they never understand. You guys have done a great job. But you know what? Wouldn't it be fun to take it a little bit higher? Not because you want an award, because wouldn't it be neat to create the greatest place you can possibly teach in and the greatest place you can be a student in? Thank you very much for allowing me to be here.